A fake HOA cop parked on our ranch. Grandpa chained his truck and dragged it straight into the creek. The first time the black pickup truck rolled up our ranch driveway, the air was thick with late summer heat, the kind that makes the horizon ripple like water and the cicadas scream loud enough to drown out thought. At first, we figured it was a lost traveler, a stranger looking for directions, maybe someone who had mistaken our dirt road for the turnoff to Highway 19. Folks did that every once in a while. But the moment the driver's door opened, everything fell off. The man who stepped out wasn't the kind of lost traveler you'd expect in ranch country. He wasn't wearing dusty jeans or scuffed boots. No, he came out in press cargo pants, shiny black boots, and a tactical-looking vest with block letters across the chest. HOA Patrol. The words were bold, white, and as fake as the cheap nylon the vest was stitched from. I remember my grandfather's reaction. Grandpa was a man built from sun and labor. His skin was worn like saddle leather, his eyes sharp as a hawk's, and though age had bent his back a little, his spirit stood straighter than any man I knew. He'd worked this ranch for nearly 60 years, and nothing rattled him. Not drought, not coyotes, not city men trying to buy him out. When he saw that vest, though, his jaw tightened. The stranger didn't bother with a greeting. He shut the truck door, squared his shoulders, and said in a flat voice, "I'm here to inspect violations." That was it. No name, no badge number, no explanation of who he was or why he thought he had authority on our property. Grandpa shifted his weight, planted his boots firm in the gravel, and spoke in the calm but razor-edged way he always did when he wanted to remind someone they were treading too close to trouble. "Son," he said, "this ain't an HOA neighborhood. This is private land." The stranger didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. Didn't even blink. Instead, he smirked. A thin, condescending curl of the lips, the kind of look city officials sometimes give country folk when they think they're smarter than us. Then he turned, walked right back to his truck, and, without asking, parked it under the shade of our pecan tree like he owned the place. The gravel crunched, and my stomach dropped. Something about the way he claimed space, bold as brass, told me this wasn't some mistake. This man had come here for a reason. I was standing on the porch when it happened, leaning against the rail with a glass of iced tea sweating in my hand. My younger brother, Jake, was beside me, fiddling with the strap of his baseball cap. He was only 17 then, but he'd already grown into a man's frame, broad shoulders, calloused hands. Still, I saw the nervous flicker in his eyes when the truck rolled up. "Grandpa's gonna run him off, right?" Jake whispered. I nodded, though truth be told, I wasn't so sure. Because this wasn't the first time we'd seen odd things lately. 2 nights before, a strange SUV had slowed at the edge of our property, headlights cutting across the pasture before driving off into the dark. Last week, we found a flyer stuffed under our mailbox, talking about community regulations and beautification standards. Only thing was, we weren't part of any community. Our ranch sat 10 miles outside city limits, surrounded by nothing but mesquite, dust, and the endless Texas sky. We'd chalked it up to a mistake. But as I watched that black pickup gleam in the sun, my gut told me it wasn't. Grandpa walked right up to the driver's side, leaned in just enough to see the dashboard, and barked, "Take your toy vest and your shiny truck and roll it on out of here. You're trespassing." The man, tall, maybe mid-40s, with slick-back hair and mirrored sunglasses, didn't move. He just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, calm as could be. "I'll be back," he said finally, voice low but steady. You can't ignore regulations forever. Then, without another word, he started the engine. The roar of the pickup echoed through the pasture as he reversed down the driveway, dust curling up behind his tires. He didn't speed. He didn't peel out. He just drove slow, steady, and deliberate, like he wanted us to watch him leave. Like it was a warning. That night, we sat around the kitchen table, the old ceiling fan clacking above us. Grandma was worried, of course. She kept wringing her hands, muttering about men with no respect for boundaries. Mom said we should call the sheriff, but Grandpa just shook his head. "Man like that ain't law," he muttered, pouring himself another cup of coffee. "He's a faker, and the sheriff knows it." "Then why not report him?" I asked. Grandpa's eyes cut to mine, steel gray sharp. Because, he said, reporting a rattlesnake, don't stop it from coiling closer. Sometimes, the more noise you make, the more it comes back meaner. The room fell quiet after that. Even Jake didn't argue. But I couldn't shake the unease. The black pickup, the fake vest, the words, you can't ignore regulations forever. It was like we'd been marked. And sure enough, that was just the first warning. 2 days later, we found fresh tire tracks carved deep into the dirt near the south fence line. The kind that matched a black pickup. And from that moment forward, nothing on our ranch or in our lives was ever the same. The black pickup didn't vanish after that first encounter. If anything, it became a shadow stitched into our Fridays, something we could count on like clockwork. Every week, right around noon when the sun was high enough to burn sweat into our collars, the truck came grumbling down the gravel driveway. At first, we thought maybe the man would be embarrassed. Maybe he'd realized his little stunt was pointless and he'd leave us be. But no, he doubled down. The second Friday, he parked in the exact same spot under the pecan tree, like it was his reserve place. He stepped out, vest zipped tight across his chest, clipboard in hand. This time, he didn't even glance at the house. He went straight for the barn, boots crunching on the dirt. I remember standing with Jake by the porch, watching him march across our land as if he owned the soil beneath his feet. He didn't ask permission, didn't tip his head in respect, just strolled past the horse trough and circled the barn, scribbling notes like some kind of inspector. Grandpa ain't gonna like this, Jake muttered, fists balled at his sides. Grandpa didn't like it. He came striding out from the tool shed, wiping grease off his hands with an old rag, and stopped 10 feet from the man. His voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut a board in half. Boy, Grandpa said, I told you once. You're not welcome here. The man didn't even look up, just snapped another picture with his phone, this time of our corral where the cattle milled lazily in the dust. Then he spoke in that same low, steady tone. You've got fencing violations, and your barn's exterior is unapproved. Grandpa's jaw clenched. Unapproved by who? God? The cattle? By the association, the man replied flatly, finally turning his mirrored sunglasses toward Grandpa. Standards matter. You'll be fined. Jake let out a sharp laugh, the kind that wasn't funny at all. Fined? For what? For raising beef on our own dirt. The man didn't answer. He just tucked his clipboard under his arm, walked back toward the truck, and, like before, drove off slow, deliberate, like every tire roll was a statement. That evening, the first envelope showed up in the mailbox. A thick white envelope stamped with bold red letters. HOA enforcement notice. Grandma brought it in, frowning as she dropped it on the kitchen table. We all gathered around, and Grandpa tore it open with one quick rip. Inside was a typed letter on generic printer paper. Subject, violation of community standards. Property address, our ranch's address. Violations, improper fencing, non-compliant structures, unauthorized livestock density. At the bottom was a cheap rubber stamp in blue ink, HOA Enforcement Division. No names, no signatures, no contact number, just a warning. Grandpa spat his tobacco into an old tin can, crumpled the letter in one hand, and tossed it in the trash. Boy thinks he's the law, he muttered. He's nothing but a pest. But the pest didn't go away. The third Friday, the routine repeated. The truck rolled in. The man walked around like a surveyor, snapping pictures of our barn, our cattle, even Grandma's chicken coop. He never crossed paths with us directly, just wandered the property, scribbling notes. When Grandpa tried to block his way near the hay shed, the man muttered something that made my skin crawl. Obstruction of inspection is an additional violation. Grandpa's face turned red, but he didn't swing. He just said through gritted teeth, keep pushing, son, and see what violation you get next. The man left like always. And that night, another letter. Subject, second notice, escalating violations. By the fourth Friday, Grandma refused to let Jake or me go outside when the truck arrived. Stay on the porch, she ordered, her hands trembling as she poured sweet tea into tall glasses. Don't give that man any reason to mess with you. So we watched through the screen door as he walked the fence line, pointing at posts like he was counting sins. When he stopped to take a picture of our cattle trough, Jake cursed under his breath. "He's building a case," Jake whispered. "Like he's going to drag us into court or something." Grandpa overheard, and his reply was quiet but heavy. "He ain't got a court." But still, the man acted like he did. And every week, the letters came. By the 5th week, we had a whole stack of them, each stamped with HOA enforcement, each listing stranger and stranger accusations. One claimed our barn violated color scheme compliance. Another said our cattle density exceeded community livestock limits. One even warned about excessive dust levels caused by non-regulated soil maintenance. Dust on a Texas ranch. Grandpa laughed so hard at that one he nearly choked. Might as well find the wind while he's at it. But beneath the laughter, I saw it, the tightness in his jaw, the storm brewing in his eyes. This wasn't funny anymore. The 7th Friday brought something new. This time, the man didn't just circle the barn. He walked right up to the house. He didn't knock, didn't call out. He just stood at the bottom of the porch steps, scribbling notes about our siding, the flower pots Grandma kept by the door, the swing Grandpa had built 20 years ago. That was when Grandpa lost his calm. He stormed out, shotgun resting easy in the crook of his arm. Not pointed, not raised, just held. His voice carried like thunder. "You've got 5 seconds to get off my porch." For the first time, the man hesitated. He glanced at the shotgun, then at Grandpa, then back at the house. Finally, he smirked again, the same smug curl of the lips that had started all this, and said, "The association will hear about this." Then he walked back to his truck and drove away. That night, the letter in our mailbox was different. No longer just a notice of violations. This one was labeled in thick, bold type. Final warning. Inside, the words were short and chilling. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. No details. No explanation. Just that. Grandpa crumpled it, like always, but this time he didn't throw it in the trash. He tucked it into the pocket of his flannel shirt, close to his chest. And I knew then that this wasn't just about a pest. It was about a war coming to our doorstep. The strange visits didn't stop. They only got bolder. Some Fridays, the man brought a camera with a telephoto lens, standing in the field like a paparazzi photographer, snapping pictures of us working cattle. Other times, he left notices with weird symbols on them, stamps shaped like eagle crests, seals that looked official but weren't. Neighbors started whispering. Old Man Parker down the road asked if we joined some kind of community improvement program. Mrs. Hill said she'd seen the black truck parked by the county road late at night, lights off, just sitting there. The strangest part? When Dad finally called the sheriff, they came out, nodded politely, and said they'd look into it. But nothing happened. No follow-up. No patrols. No official acknowledgement. It was as if the man had authority, or at least protection. And every Friday, the routine repeated. The black truck, the fake vest, the scribbled notes, the warnings in our mailbox. Each one a reminder that someone, somewhere, had decided we weren't living by rules we never agreed to. And with every passing week, it felt less like harassment and more like preparation. By the 10th Friday, Jake stopped asking what the man wanted. Grandma stopped wringing her hands. Even Mom grew quiet. The only one who kept speaking about it was Grandpa. And his words were always the same, sharp and steady. "Boy thinks he's the law. He's nothing but a pest. But pests, if you let them, can swarm." And I think, deep down, Grandpa knew this was only the beginning. Because warnings, no matter how strange, always come before something more. By the 12th Friday, something inside Grandpa snapped. Up until then, he'd tolerated the black truck's ritual like a man tolerates a wasp circling his porch. Annoying, persistent, but not yet worth the swat. He spat, he growled, he grumbled, but he hadn't acted. Maybe he'd hoped the intruder would get bored and move on. But pests don't leave when you ignore them. They dig deeper. And this one had grown bolder with each visit. It wasn't just notes in the mailbox anymore. Now he left them pinned to the barn door, with push pins fluttering in the wind like ugly flags. Some were stuffed in the cracks of the porch railing. Once, we even found one tucked under the windshield wiper of Grandpa's old Ford. Always stamped with that cheap HOA enforcement logo, always ensigned, always dripping with arrogance. That evening, just before sundown, the black pickup pulled up earlier than usual. The air was heavy with storm clouds, a red glow bleeding across the horizon. The cattle were restless, snorting and shifting as if they sensed what was coming. I stood by the barn doors, watching as the man got out with more swagger than ever before. His boots hit the gravel slow, deliberate. He didn't even bother with the clipboard this time, just strutted straight toward the porch like it was his house and not ours. Jake cursed under his breath beside me. He's a skin for it now. Grandpa emerged from the tool shed, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't speak right away. He just watched the man approach, eyes narrowing, jaw tight. The air felt charged, like the sky before lightning splits it open. The man stopped at the bottom of the steps, smiled that smug little smile, and tapped the front of his vest with 2 fingers. "Evening," he said. "I told you before, non-compliance comes with consequences." Grandpa dropped the rag on the porch rail and stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wood. His voice came low, sharp as a whip crack. "Get off my land," he said, each word deliberate, "or you won't like what happens next." The man laughed, actually laughed. He tapped his vest again, where a shiny little badge was clipped. Except up close, it wasn't shiny at all. It was cheap plastic, the kind you'd find in a child's dress-up kit, with the words HOA Patrol etched in crooked letters. He flashed it like it meant something. "I've got authority here," he said. I swear the air went still in that moment. The cicadas, the cattle, even the rustling pecan leaves seemed to hold their breath. Grandpa's face didn't change. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just stared at that fake badge for a long, cold moment. Then he leaned forward slightly, so his shadow fell over the man, and said in a voice that carried years of grit and command, "Your badge is plastic. Your authority, imaginary." The man smirked again, but it faltered this time. Only a hair, but I saw it. A crack in his mask. He straightened his shoulders, cleared his throat, and muttered something about documenting non-cooperation. Grandpa didn't budge. He stepped 1 stair down, closing the space between them, and his hand hovered just an inch above a knife he always carried on his belt. Not drawn, not a threat, just a reminder. "You set foot past this porch again," Grandpa said, voice low and lethal, "and you'll find out what kind of authority lives out here. And it sure as hell ain't yours." The man froze. For a second, I thought he might push back, call the sheriff, bluff with more papers, maybe even try to stand his ground. But something in Grandpa's tone, something primal, unshakable, cut through the bravado. The man backed up 1 step then another. His smile was gone now, replaced by a tight line. He muttered something under his breath. Could have been a threat, could have been a promise, and turned back to his truck. The door slammed, the engine roared, and the pickup reversed down the driveway, kicking up a storm of dust. Inside, the message was short and sharp. Failure to comply with HOA regulations will result in immediate corrective action. No fines listed, no violations. Just that phrase, immediate corrective action. Grandpa read it, folded it neatly, and slid it into his shirt pocket. He didn't tear it up this time, didn't spit on it. He just kept it close, like he wanted it with him at all times. Jake asked him what it meant. Grandpa's reply was as grim as I'd ever heard. "It means," he said, "the pest thinks he's ready to bite." From then on, the truck didn't just come Fridays. We saw it on Tuesdays, on Sundays, sometimes parked at the end of the road at night, engine off, lights out, just sitting there, watching. It was no longer about inspections. It was about intimidation. And as much as Grandpa had confronted him, drawn the line, and called him out for what he was, a fraud with a toy badge, something told me the man wasn't finished. He wasn't going to stop because of 1 warning. No, he was just getting started. And deep down, I think Grandpa knew that too. Because when a man builds his authority on lies, he'll do anything to protect the illusion, even if it means war. By the time the 14th Friday rolled around, Grandpa was done playing games. The stack of notices sat on the kitchen counter like a pile of poison, each stamped with its fake HOA enforcement seal, each one a reminder that a stranger thought he had a claim over what generations of our family had built. The black pickup's headlights in the distance had become as familiar as the sunrise, and the sound of its engine was enough to sour Grandpa's mood before a word was spoken. But this Friday would be different. Grandpa didn't wait on the porch. He didn't come out of the tool shed, or the barn halfway through the man charade. No, he was already there, waiting. I remember the sight like it was burned into my memory. Grandpa leaning against the barn wall, one boot crossed over the other, his old hunting rifle slung casually across his shoulder. Not held, not raised, just resting there the way a man might carry a cane or a walking stick. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows that stretched across the pasture. The cattle were restless, their lowing echoing like a warning drumbeat. Grandpa wasn't planning to shoot. That rifle hadn't fired a bullet in years. But in ranch country, sometimes a weapon isn't meant for pulling a trigger. Sometimes it's meant to remind a man what line he's about to cross. The black pickup crunched up the driveway, dust rising behind it like smoke from a fuse. When it stopped by the pecan tree, the man climbed out slower than usual. No clipboard this time. No phone camera. Just him, his vest zipped up, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. He didn't look at me or Jake, who stood frozen near the porch steps. He didn't glance at Grandma, peeking through the screen door. His gaze went straight to Grandpa, waiting by the barn. The air was so thick you could taste it, like copper and storm. The man squared his shoulders, took a step closer, and spoke in a voice louder than he usually used, like he was performing for an audience. "You'll regret this," he said. Grandpa didn't move, didn't twitch. His voice came steady, low, and final. "No, son," he said, eyes locked on the man. "You will." It wasn't just words. It was a promise. The man stopped walking. His smirk wavered, just for a breath, before he replaced it with a scoff. He tapped the badge pinned to his vest, a flimsy piece of molded plastic that caught the dying sunlight but fooled no one. "You don't understand how this works," he said. "There are rules, regulations, consequences." Grandpa shifted his stance, letting the rifle slide just slightly, the metal glinting in the orange light. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The message was clear. This was his land, his rules. "Boy," Grandpa said, his drawl heavier now, "the only consequence you're about to see is what happens when a trespasser don't take a hint." From where I stood, I could see Jake's fists tighten at his sides. His knuckles went white, but he didn't move. He knew better. We all did. This was Grandpa's standoff. And though he never raised his voice, his presence filled the whole yard. He was the storm, the fence line, the weight of history pressing down. Every word he spoke was backed by 6 decades of sweat, scars, and blood poured into that soil. The man tried to laugh it off, but it sounded forced, hollow. He muttered something about escalation and final action, but his steps faltered when he turned back toward the truck. For the first time since this began, he looked unsettled. He slid into the driver's seat, slammed the door harder than he meant to, and started the engine. But he didn't drive away right off. He sat there idling, staring at Grandpa through the windshield, like he wanted to reclaim the upper hand. Grandpa didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact. He just stood there, calm as stone, the rifle resting on his shoulder, until the truck finally backed down the driveway and disappeared in a cloud of dust. When the sound of the engine faded, silence swallowed the ranch. Grandma opened the screen door, voice trembling. "Lord have mercy. Henry, what if he comes back with?" "He will," Grandpa cut in. His tone wasn't fearful, just matter of fact. Jake finally spoke, his voice tight with rage. "Next time, let me handle him. I'll knock that stupid vest off his chest." Grandpa's sharp glare stopped him cold. "This ain't about fists, boy. This is about land. About respect. You don't fight a rattlesnake by stomping on the dirt. You wait until you see the strike, then you cut the head clean off." That night, none of us slept much. The windows rattled with the wind, and every distant engine sounded like the black pickup circling back. The dogs barked at nothing, tails stiff, hackles raised. Even the cattle were restless, pacing near the fence line. When dawn came, a new envelope was nailed to our front gate. Not left in the mailbox. Not stuffed under the porch rail. Nailed. The paper was heavier than before, stamped with a new phrase. "Enforcement action imminent." Beneath it, a single line. "This is your last chance." Grandpa pulled it down, read it once, and then folded it into his pocket. His face gave nothing away, but his silence said more than any words could. The standoff had changed everything. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was war on the horizon, and Grandpa was ready. That old hunting rifle never left his side after that day. He carried it on the porch, in the barn, even leaned it against the kitchen table while sipping his coffee. Not because he was itching for a fight, but because he knew when men start bluffing and lose ground, they don't back away. They double down. And when they come back, they don't come back alone. The evening had that heavy stillness that only comes before a storm, not just in the sky, but in the soul. The cicadas had gone quiet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Out on the far edge of the ranch, I could see the fake HOA man pacing near the creek bed, his hands resting on his hips as though he owned every inch of the soil beneath his boots. He carried himself with the smugness of a sheriff in some forgotten western, though his badge was plastic and his authority as hollow as the lies that spilled from his mouth. Grandpa watched him from the barn doorway, chewing slowly on the end of a blade of grass. His face was weathered, his eyes steady, gray and sharp as a hawk's. He wasn't a man who rattled easy, but I could see the coil of tension in his shoulders. Weeks of harassment had been boiling to this point, and the lid was about to come off. "Boy," he said quietly, without looking away from the man, "go fetch me that heavy logging chain from the back of the shed." I blinked. The big rusted one. The very same. The one your daddy used back when we cleared the Northwoods. I hesitated, glancing between Grandpa and the intruder strutting near the creek like he was scouting property lines. "What for?" Grandpa finally turned his gaze to me and winked. "Some lessons gotta be taught the hard way." I felt a shiver of both excitement and unease. Grandpa wasn't a cruel man, but when he decided a line had been crossed, he didn't just push back. He made sure whoever crossed it would never dare again. I jogged across the dirt yard toward the shed. The sun was sinking low, throwing long shadows across the fields. The shed creaked when I pulled the door open, and the familiar smell of oil, old wood, and iron filled my lungs. There was the chain. Thick, rust red, coiled like a sleeping snake in the corner. It had been used decades ago to haul logs down from the ridge, links forged to withstand tons of pressure. I could barely lift it, but adrenaline lent me strength. By the time I dragged it back across the yard, the weight leaving grooves in the dirt behind me, Grandpa had already rolled the man's truck closer to the barn under the guise of helping him park. The intruder hadn't even noticed, too busy snooping near the creek, muttering to himself about ordinances and fines. "Bring it here, boy," Grandpa said, kneeling beside the rear axle. His hands moved with the confidence of a man who had fixed more machines than most men had driven. He looped the chain around the axle once, twice, 3 times, until it was tight as a coiled spring. The iron links bit into the metal like teeth. I swallowed hard. "Grandpa, what if this goes too far?" Grandpa's eyes narrowed. "He's already gone too far. He's trespassed, lied, threatened. Now he's about to learn that a man's land is sacred. You don't walk onto it pretending you're king without paying a toll." The chain rattled as he locked it in place with an old padlock. He tugged it twice, testing the strength. The sound echoed in the quiet yard, metallic and final, like the toll of a warning bell. From the creek, the man's voice carried across the open air. "You know, old-timer, this land ain't yours forever. You'll slip up one day, and then the HOA will step in to make things right. You're just delaying the inevitable." Grandpa stood, dusting his hands. He didn't answer. Instead, he walked over to the porch, sat himself down in the rocking chair, and began whittling a piece of cedar as though nothing in the world could trouble him. I stayed near the barn, heart thumping in my chest. Every tick of the clock made me more aware of the trap, sitting there, coiled and waiting beneath that truck. Minutes turned to an hour. The man finally strolled back from the creek, his boots crunching over gravel. He looked around, squinting. "What's this? Moving my truck for me now? Guess you know who's really in charge." Grandpa didn't even look up from his whittling. "You best be careful what you believe, son. Authority ain't something you paste on with a toy badge. It's something you earn day by day, deed by deed." The man scoffed. "Keep your farm wisdom speeches. Why get back to the office? There'll be papers drawn up. Finis. Orders. You'll regret crossing me." He climbed into his truck, slamming the door. The engine roared to life, coughing smoke. He put in gear and pressed the gas. At first, nothing happened. The truck lurched forward with a screech of strained metal, then jolted violently to a stop. The rear axle groaned, and the tires spun uselessly, throwing up dust and gravel. The chain held firm. What the? The man gunned the engine harder. The truck bucked like a wild horse, rear end locked in place. Smoke poured from the tires. The smell of burning rubber filled the yard. I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking, but Grandpa sat there calmly, carving shavings of cedar that fluttered to the ground. The man stuck his head out the window, face red with fury. "What did you do?" Grandpa finally looked up, eyes as cold and sharp as steel. "Told you, son. Some lessons got to be taught the hard way." The man cursed, slamming his fist on the wheel. The truck jolted, growled, and then with one final wrench, the engine sputtered and died. Smoke rose from under the hood. The smell of oil and rubber filled the air. He stumbled out, coughing, glaring at Grandpa. "You'll pay for this." Grandpa stood, setting down his knife and wood. "No, son. You just paid. That's the toll for trespassing on my land." Silence hung between them, thick and dangerous. Even the crickets dared not speak. The man's bravado faltered. His eyes darted to the chain, then to Grandpa, then to the darkening fields stretching endlessly behind us. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in his face. Grandpa stepped forward, boots crunching steady on the dirt. "Now you listen close. You bring yourself back here again, you'll find out just how deep this creek runs. You're playing sheriff in a town that don't exist, and you've got no law behind you. You're done." The man opened his mouth, then closed it again. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Finally, he turned on his heel and stormed down the dirt road, muttering threats under his breath. He didn't even look back. Grandpa watched him go, arms folded across his chest. Then, slowly, he turned to me, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes, boy," he said softly, "it ain't the bullet or the fist that wins a fight. It's the chain you set before it starts." I nodded, the weight of his words sinking deep. That night, as the sky turned black and the first drops of rain fell, I knew one thing for certain. This battle wasn't over. But the war had shifted. Grandpa had drawn a line in the dirt, and the intruder had finally seen it. The air hung thick with dust and tension, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Cicadas screeched in the distance, their chorus echoing off the low hills that cradled our ranch. The sun beat down mercilessly, sinking low in the western sky, casting long orange shadows across the fields. Everything seemed to hold its breath. The man strolled back toward his truck with that smug grin plastered across his face, the same grin he had worn every time he parked on our land like it was his personal driveway. He didn't notice the faint rattle of the chain hidden in the dirt. He didn't see the glint of steel running from the rear axle of his truck to Grandpa's old John Deere tractor idling by the barn. He didn't realize that today was going to be different. Grandpa stood tall in the tractor's seat, hands gripping the wheel, the brim of his hat shadowing his weathered face. His eyes never left the man. His jaw was set, his posture rigid, like a soldier preparing for one last decisive charge. I sat on the fence post nearby, heart hammering against my ribs, watching every second with a mix of fear and awe. The man climbed into his truck, slammed the door, and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, coughing smoke into the sky. He gave the accelerator a few arrogant revs, as though to announce that he was in control. His voice carried over the rumble, sharp with mockery. "Better move that antique out of the way, old man. You can't stop progress." Grandpa didn't flinch. He just reached up and tugged the brim of his hat lower, the way he always did when he was about to do something serious. He looked at me, eyes narrowing just slightly. That was the signal. My stomach dropped. The tractor's engine growled as Grandpa pressed the throttle. The beast shuddered, exhaust spitting from its rusted pipe. The heavy iron wheels ground into the dirt, carving grooves as it surged forward. The chain snapped taut. A metallic scream cut through the air, sharp and savage, as steel links strained against steel. The man's truck jolted violently, rear tires squealing, spitting dirt and gravel in every direction. His grin faltered. His hands gripped the wheel tighter, confusion spreading across his face. "What the?" he muttered, slamming the gas pedal harder. The tires spun furiously, clawing at the earth, but they found no purchase. Smoke curled from the rubber as the engine whined in protest. The more he fought, the deeper the rear tires sank into the soft dirt. Dust clouds rose, stinging my eyes and filling my lungs. Grandpa's tractor, steady and relentless, pressed forward like some ancient machine of war. The chain groaned, stretched, then held fast. Inch by inch, the truck lurched backward, dragged against the man's desperate resistance. "Hey, stop!" the man shouted, panic creeping into his voice now. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by fear. He twisted in his seat, realizing too late that his truck was no longer his own. But Grandpa was unstoppable. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, his boots braced on the tractor's worn pedals. His hat trembled slightly in the wind, but his gaze never wavered. "Lesson time," Grandpa muttered under his breath, barely loud enough for me to hear. The tractor roared. The chain rattled and screeched as sparks flew where it scraped against stones. The truck skidded backward, gouging trenches in the dirt road. The man leaned on the horn, its shrill cry echoing across the valley, but there was no one to come to his rescue. The creek loomed ahead. Its muddy banks glistened under the dying sun, water rushing with a steady, mocking rhythm. It had swallowed many things over the years: fallen trees, broken fence posts, the occasional unlucky deer. Today, it would take something else. The man flung open his door, trying to jump out, but the sudden jerk of the truck slammed it shut again. He cursed, pounding his fists on the wheel. His bravado was gone. His eyes darted wildly, searching for escape, but there was none. "Grandpa," I shouted over the noise, my young voice cracking. "He's gonna—" "I know." Grandpa cut me off, his voice calm as steel. The tractor pressed forward, gears grinding, engine howling in defiance of age. The truck's rear bumper scraped the dirt as it was dragged, inch by relentless inch, toward the edge of the creek. The man screamed, "You're crazy. You'll regret this." Grandpa's reply came like a hammer striking iron. "No, son, you will." With one final surge, the tractor pulled the truck over the embankment. The chain clinked once, twice, then snapped loose as the vehicle slid helplessly down the slope. The truck hit the water with a bone-rattling splash. Muddy water erupted into the air, drenching the banks. The current seized the vehicle immediately, dragging it sideways, its tires still spinning uselessly. The horn blared once more, a pitiful cry swallowed by the rush of water. I stared, wide-eyed, breathless, my fingernails digging into the wood of the fence post. The man scrambled out through the passenger window, slipping and cursing, his clothes soaked and heavy. He waded ashore, sputtering and choking, rage burning in his eyes. But his truck was gone. The water pulled it deeper, swallowing a hole. Its roof vanished under the murky surface, bubbles rising like the creek itself was laughing. Then silence. Only the rush of water remained. The man staggered onto the bank, dripping and broken, glaring at Grandpa like he wanted to kill him. But he didn't say a word. He knew better. His truck was gone, his pride drowned with it. Grandpa eased the tractor back into idle, the engine rumbling low, steady, victorious. He looked at me then, calm, unshaken, and tipped his hat. "Some lessons," he said, voice low and certain, "stick longer when they sting." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a truck or trespassing or even about some fake HOA cop. This was about respect, about the old ways of standing your ground when no one else would, about showing the world that some lines were never meant to be crossed. The man limped away down the road, soaked and humiliated, leaving nothing behind but muddy footprints and a silence so deep it felt like the whole valley was listening. The chain snapped tight with a metallic clank that echoed across the valley, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to hold its breath. Then came the roar of Grandpa's tractor, a guttural machine snarl that shook the dirt under our boots. its wheels bit into the ground with raw determination. The fake cop's shiny truck, all chrome and arrogance, lurched forward like a stubborn mule, tires screaming in protest. The smell of burnt rubber stung my nose. Dust rose in choking clouds, mixing with the scent of engine oil and freshly churned earth. My hands balled into fists, and I found myself holding my breath, as if I could somehow will the tractor to keep pulling. Grandpa sat high in his seat, calm as ever, hands steady on the wheel. His face didn't show strain, but his knuckles were pale against the worn grip. He'd done this before, maybe not dragging a trespasser's truck into a creek, but he knew the rhythm of steel and soil, the battle between stubborn weight and steady pull. The chain groaned like a living thing. Links shuddered, sparks flying when metal scraped against the axle. The truck jolted violently, bouncing as the tractor gained ground. The fake cop inside fumbled with the steering wheel, his head jerking side to side in disbelief. He slammed the accelerator, but the tires only dug deeper trenches into the earth. And then, moment by moment, inch by inch, the tractor proved stronger. The front end of the truck lifted slightly as the axle strained under the pull. The vehicle slid, tires shredding dirt and spitting rocks. The sound was unbearable, like thunder tearing open the sky. Every screech of metal was the sound of arrogance meeting consequence. "Grandpa's really doing it," I whispered, though my voice was lost in the chaos. The truck, helpless now, surrendered to momentum. It scraped across the uneven ground, bumping over roots and rocks until its nose tilted toward the creek bed. The man inside shouted something, but it was swallowed by the roar of the tractor and the grinding shriek of dragging metal. Then came the moment none of us would forget. With one final yank, like a fisherman reeling in the biggest catch of his life, Grandpa's tractor pulled the truck forward and tipped it headlong into the water. The splash was thunderous. A great sheet of water erupted skyward, shimmering in the sunlight like shattered glass. Droplets rained down over the bank, soaking the weeds and spattering my clothes. The creek, shallow but relentless, swallowed the truck's front end, water rushing over the hood and surging against the windshield. Inside, chaos. The fake cop scrambled, his eyes wide with panic. He shoved the door open, water pouring in, and stumbled out into the creek. The current, though shallow, nearly knocked him off balance as mud sucked at his boots. He flailed, arms windmilling, before finally splashing onto his knees. His uniform shirt clung to him like second skin, dark and heavy. His shiny badge, the one he wore so proudly, glinted once before disappearing under a layer of filth and creek water. He came up sputtering, coughing, face red with rage and embarrassment. His hair, once slicked back with too much gel, now plastered to his forehead like wilted weeds. Grandpa eased off the tractor, letting it idle as he swung himself down with the grace of a man half his age. He adjusted his hat, tilted it against the sun, and walked slowly to the water's edge. His boots crunched against gravel, steady and deliberate, like a judge walking toward the guilty. The fake cop stood there dripping, chest heaving, glaring at Grandpa with a mix of fury and shame. You can't do this," he sputtered, spitting creek water. "This is destruction of property. You'll pay for this, old man. I'll have you arrested." Grandpa didn't even raise his voice. He just tipped his hat lower, shadowing his eyes, and said the words that carried across the land like a verdict. "Next time, stay out of other people's land." The silence afterward was heavier than the splash itself. The only sounds were the creek gurgling around the half-submerged truck and the distant caw of a crow circling overhead. The fake cop looked around, desperate for support, but there was none. Neighbors had gathered at the fence line, drawn by the commotion. They stood in quiet rows, arms crossed, faces set in stony silence. Some smirked, others simply nodded, but not a soul moved to help him. It wasn't just about one man's truck. It was about a lifetime of arrogance, a stranger's audacity to claim authority where none was given, to trample over respect and boundaries. And now, justice, rough, muddy, undeniable justice, had been delivered. The man staggered toward the bank, boots sloshing, water streaming down his legs. Each step was heavier than the last, weighed down not just by mud but by humiliation. He muttered threats under his breath, words like lawyer and charges, but they sounded hollow, as empty as his dripping badge. Grandpa watched him climb, arms folded across his chest. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just stood there, carved from stone, the living embodiment of a truth as old as the land itself. You don't trespass where respect is owed. The fake cop finally reached the dirt road, water dripping into the dust at his feet. His truck remained in the creek, a gleaming monument to his failure, tilted at an awkward angle with water still rushing around its wheels. He glanced back once, as if expecting anyone, to offer him help. But the silence of the neighbors was final. He realized then that no one was on his side. Grandpa turned, gave me a nod, and walked back to his tractor. He climbed in, engine rumbling steady and strong, and started rolling back toward the barn. I followed, heart pounding, eyes wide, knowing I had just witnessed something I'd tell my grandchildren one day. And as we left the man standing there, drenched and alone, I thought about Grandpa's words. Some lessons, I realized, really do have to be taught the hard way. The man didn't come back for days. His absence wasn't silence. It was proof of his humiliation. Out on the ranch, peace returned like a long-lost friend. The gravel road that once echoed with the crunch of his boots and the rumble of his truck now lay undisturbed, stretching under the wide Texas sun. The cattle grazed lazily again, no longer spooked by his daily intrusion, and the air carried only the honest sounds of ranch life. The lowing of cows, the creak of barn doors, and the slow, rhythmic hum of Grandpa's tractor as he made his rounds. But outside the ranch, the story had already taken on a life of its own. By the second day, word had spread across the small town 5 miles away. At coffee shops, hardware stores, and feed supply counters, folks retold the tale with laughter shaking their shoulders. They called him Creek Cop. The name stuck faster than barbed wire in tall grass. Every retelling made the story bigger, funnier, and crueler. One man at the diner swore he'd driven past just in time to see the truck nose first in the creek, steam and water spraying like a busted geyser. Another claimed the fake cop had been crying as he crawled out, his shiny badge glinting uselessly in the sun. Whether those details were true or not didn't matter. What mattered was the spectacle. Everyone knew the truth in their bones. He had been beaten by the old rancher who didn't tolerate trespassers. At the Rusty Spur Saloon, the laughter was the loudest. A group of ranch hands slapped the bar and hollered every time someone mimed Grandpa, tipping his hat and saying, "Next time, stay out of other people's land." They even started calling drinks Creek Specials, whiskey with a splash of water. By the third day, the man's reputation had collapsed completely. His so-called authority, that ridiculous fake badge he'd been flashing around, was stripped bare for what it was, a pathetic attempt to bully decent folks. He hadn't been an officer, not by any stretch, just a pretender with a cheap badge and a louder mouth and brains. Now he was nothing but the butt of every joke in the county. Grandpa, however, never boasted. He went about his chores as though nothing had happened, fixing fences, feeding cattle, and checking irrigation lines with the same steady rhythm he'd always kept. A man who wins a fight doesn't need to brag, he told me quietly when I asked why he didn't at least drive into town to see people laughing about it. His hands were calloused, his face unreadable, but I caught the faintest glimmer of pride in his eyes. The silence on our land was a relief, but it carried an undertone of unease. Creek Cop hadn't shown his face again, but that didn't mean he was gone. Humiliated men could be dangerous. They could come back, angrier than before, driven less by arrogance and more by revenge. That thought lingered in the back of my mind every night as I lay in bed listening to the quiet hum of crickets. I'd glance out the window, half expecting the glint of headlights on the dirt road or the faint crunch of tires rolling over gravel. But none came. Only stars, endless and watchful, filled the darkness above. On the 5th day, the sheriff himself came out to the ranch. He leaned against his patrol car, arms folded, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Heard you gave that fool a bath," he said to Grandpa. Grandpa didn't flinch. He put himself in the water. "I just pull." The sheriff chuckled. "Town's been having a field day with it. That man's done. Badge don't mean squat when the whole county knows you're a fraud." He paused, his tone softening. "But keep your eyes open. Men like him, they don't take shame lightly." Grandpa nodded, slow and deliberate. "This ranch has weathered storms fiercer than one man's pride. If he comes back, he'll find the grounds no softer than before." The sheriff tipped his hat and drove away, leaving a trail of dust that lingered in the evening air. By the end of the week, it was clear the man's pride had taken more than just a bruise. His truck was pulled from the creek, but it sat abandoned in front of a garage on the edge of town, its nose still rust-stained from the water. He hadn't been seen at the diner, or the feed store, or anywhere else folks usually gathered. Rumor had it he holed up in a rented room above the laundromat, too embarrassed to show his face. For us, life went on, but there was no denying it. The ranch had become a legend. Neighbors driving past slowed their trucks to catch a glimpse of the creek, whispering stories to their kids in the back seat. Some even pulled over just to laugh at the thought of a grown man scrambling out of the water, dripping wet and defeated. I thought about it often, about how one act of defiance could ripple so far beyond the moment itself. Grandpa hadn't just chained a truck. He'd chained the man's pride, his reputation, and dragged both straight into the water for all to see. And the lesson was now burned into the soil of our land. This ranch wasn't to be crossed. But as I looked out across the fields one evening, the sun sinking low and painting the horizon blood orange, I couldn't shake a thought that nagged at me. A man like that didn't just disappear. And when he came back, he wouldn't come alone. Arrogance is like a sickness. It never quite leaves a man, no matter how many times life knocks him down. The so-called creek cop had been humiliated before the whole town. His truck sat rusting in the shallow creek bed, half submerged like a carcass. Folks pointed and laughed whenever they drove past. Children skipped stones at its dented doors. The story of his downfall spread wider each day, and his fake authority dissolved like paper in the rain. But instead of learning, the man let his pride twist him into something darker. He told himself he'd been wronged, that the rancher had stolen his property, that he was owed respect. Nights found him pacing in a dingy motel room on the edge of town, staring at his muddy boots, swearing he would not be remembered as the fool who lost to an old man with a chain. So, one moonless night, when the coyotes howled across the hills and the crickets filled the silence, the creek cop crept back toward the ranch. He had a tow truck this time, borrowed, stolen, no one knew for sure. Its headlights were off, the engine idling low, crawling up the dirt road like a predator stalking its prey. He thought no one would notice, thought he could slip in, drag his drowned truck free, and vanish into the dark before anyone knew. But Grandpa was no fool. He had grown up on this land, every fence post, every shadow familiar to him. He had seen the tire marks days earlier near the road and knew the man's kind wasn't done yet. That night, Grandpa sat on the porch with his lantern lit low, his Winchester resting across his lap, waiting. And Grandpa wasn't alone. Sitting quietly in the shadows, sipping coffee from a tin mug, was Sheriff Calloway. He'd heard about the so-called officer making trouble, but until now, he hadn't had enough reason to put him in cuffs. See, the Badge Creek cop carried wasn't just fake, it was tied to bigger crimes. There'd been reports of him running scams in 3 counties, impersonating law, threatening ranchers, extorting fines, and disappearing with the cash. Calloway had been hunting him for months. Grandpa's land was just the bait he needed. The crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. The tow truck rolled to a stop near the creek, its engine rumbling. The creek cop jumped out, boots squishing in the mud, chains rattling as he dragged them toward the half-sunken wreck. He muttered curses under his breath, tugging at the rusted door like he could pull his pride out of the water along with the truck. Then the voice came, low, steady, and carrying across the night air. "Looking for something, son?" The creek cop froze. His head snapped toward the porch where the lantern's glow revealed Grandpa's broad frame, hat tipped low, eyes sharp as steel. and beside him, the sheriff stood up slow, badge catching the faint light of the moon, revolver glinting in his hand. For a moment, silence reigned. The creek babbled softly. The owls hooted. The creek cop's chest rose and fell, sweat mixing with the mud on his face. He realized too late, this wasn't just about a truck anymore. This was a trap, and he had walked straight into it. The sheriff's boots crunched on the gravel as he stepped forward. Been a long time chasing you, boy. 3 counties, 4 warrants, and more angry ranchers than I can count. You thought you'd hide out here, pulling the same old tricks? He shook his head. Not tonight. The creek cop's eyes darted toward his tow truck, then toward the dark fields beyond, weighing his chances of running. But Grandpa shifted the Winchester ever so slightly, the sound of the metal catching loud in the still night. Best not, Grandpa said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it sharp enough to cut stone. You've taken enough from good folks. Time to pay up. The man's shoulders sagged. For once, arrogance slipped from his face, replaced by something else, fear. The sheriff moved in, spun him around, and slapped cold steel around his wrists. The chains rattled one last time, but not in victory, in defeat. As the sheriff read him his rights, Grandpa walked down to the edge of the creek. He looked at the half-sunken truck, and then back at the man who had caused so much trouble. Funny thing about pride, Grandpa muttered, tipping his hat. It always drowns faster than the man holding it. The creek cop snarled, but said nothing as the sheriff shoved him toward the patrol car. His night of revenge had turned into his final capture, and the whole town would know by sunrise. The fool who thought himself law was nothing more than a wanted con. The truck remained where it had landed, half sunken, tilted awkwardly in the muddy bend of the creek. Its once polished paint dulled by water, its windows shattered by storms, it became a part of the landscape. First, children from town would sneak out to see it, daring each other to climb on the roof or touch the mangled tow chain still wrapped around the bumper. Later, hunters and ranchers passing by would stop, spit tobacco into the current, and mutter about the story of how it came to rest there. Years passed, and the creek slowly claimed it piece by piece. Rust crept over the frame like a disease, spreading from the edges until the metal flaked at the touch. In summer, the weeds grew tall around it, nearly hiding it from the road, but in winter, when the water ran low and the brush died back, the skeleton of the truck showed again. But the truck itself wasn't the real monument. The real monument was the story. Grandpa didn't tell it often. He was a man who believed that a good deed or a strong act of justice didn't need endless retelling. Still, whenever he leaned back on his porch chair in the evenings, pipe smoke curling around his hat, someone, usually a younger ranch hand or a neighbor, would bring it up. Is it true, Mr. Callahan? Did you really chain that fella's truck and drag it straight into the creek? Grandpa would always smirk, not breaking his silence immediately. He'd puff his pipe, let the moment stretch, then finally nod. I did, he'd say simply, and he deserved every bit of it. It wasn't just about the truck or about one scammer pretending to be something he wasn't. It was about the principle. Out here, land meant survival. Ranchers didn't measure wealth in fancy watches or shiny cars. They measured it in acres, in fences, in herds. A man who disrespected another man's land was no different than a thief walking into his home. And Grandpa had no patience for thieves. The town soon gave him a name, the Creek Sheriff. It started as a joke, whispered in the saloon after a few rounds of whiskey, but like all good nicknames, it stuck. People came to respect it, even fear it. Parents used the story to discipline their kids. Don't go trespassing, or the Creek Sheriff will drag your bike into the water. Kids laughed nervously, but they never tested it. Other ranchers told it as a tale of warning. Some men respect fences. Others need a creek to remember. It was Grandpa's line, repeated and passed around until it became almost proverb. But the story didn't just stay local. As the years rolled on, versions of it traveled. A trucker swore he'd heard about it 3 states over. A deputy in another county said he'd been told the story as if it happened in his own town. That's how legends work. They outgrow the truth, spreading like wildfire, morphing until the line between fact and myth blurs. Yet for those of us who lived it, there was no doubt. We remembered the day clear as sunrise, the roar of the chain, the screech of metal, the splash as the truck was pulled into the creek like a beast being slain. And though Grandpa never sought the attention, he couldn't hide from it either. Folks came by more often, sometimes uninvited, just to catch a glimpse of the man himself. A man who stood up not with courts or papers, but with iron, grit, and a sense of right so unshakable it carved its way into memory. The sheriff who had been there that night often retold his version too. "I didn't even need to put cuffs on that fool," he'd say, shaking his head. Grandpa Callahan had already sentenced him to the only court that mattered, the creek. The scammer himself, once released after his charges caught up with him, never returned. Some said he moved states away. Some said he never worked another con. A few claimed he still muttered curses about the old bastard who ruined him. But in truth, the man was already forgotten by most. His name didn't matter. Only Grandpa's did. The truck, though, the truck was remembered. It became a kind of roadside relic, like the remains of a battle long ago. Young couples carved their initials into the rust. Hunters used it as a marker. Follow the creek until you hit the sunken truck, then head east. It was more than debris. It was a boundary stone, a warning, and a reminder that on this land, there were rules older than any law. And every now and then, when the moon was bright and the water low, you could still see the chain glinting in the mud, stubborn and unbroken. I'd ask Grandpa once in a while, "Why didn't you ever haul the truck out?" Or, "Let someone clean it up." He'd lean back, his weathered hands folded on his chest. "Because some lessons don't belong in books," he'd reply. "They belong where folks can see them. A fence post rots, a sign gets torn down. But a truck in a creek? That'll outlive me." He was right. Even as the years stretched into decades, the story never died. If anything, it grew. Some swore Grandpa had dragged the truck with his bare hands. Others claimed he chained up 3 trucks in a row. And though none of that was true, Grandpa never corrected them. Legends, he knew, were stronger when left to grow wild. And so, he became not just a man, but a symbol, a figure who stood for the stubborn, uncompromising justice of ranch country. Even today, when I walk past that creek and see the last bones of that truck half buried in the mud, I don't just see rust. I see a piece of my family's bloodline, a reminder that respect is earned, not demanded. That fences mean something. That lies, no matter how shiny the badge or polished the boots, will always be dragged down sooner or later. As Grandpa always said, with that wry half-smile under his hat brim, some men respect fences, others need a creek to remember. And with him, those words weren't just a saying. They were law.